Thank you. I want to call your attention to a slight change in the order of service in the bulletin, which means you have to do something a little differently. I've asked to have the prayers moved to follow the affirmation of faith. That means we need to pass your prayer request to the aisle when we sing that hymn after the sermon and the affirmation. And we'll see how it works. I'm asking the ushers to bring them to me at that point, or just before we enter the time of prayer. We noticed the announcement of the rose on the table in honor of Briner Grace Hoffman, and we do all grieve the passing of Elsa Carter. She is one of the people I remember from being here years ago, and I remember her as a sparkly, lively woman, and so we know she was a good addition to this church. Are there other announcements that need to be made? Is that done?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. So a couple of announcements here. First of all, some of you may or may not know that Marilyn Lang is a member of the Kappa Kappa Gamma sorority. It's one of the social sororities that exists at universities and colleges throughout the United States. Each year they conduct a fundraiser, a Trivial Pursuit fundraiser in the area, the profits of which go to several very worthy causes in the Ferguson area, including a reading program at the Central Elementary School, plus other noteworthy things. A team again from our church, members of our church, won that Trivial Pursuit last year, and they won it again this year. So congratulations to the Briners, the Parrs, the Petersons, and our younger son and his wife, Stuart Thomases. So another fun activity, and one that helps to do a lot for the community, as well as bring a lot of joy to the people from here that are participating in that now on a regular basis. So congratulations to them. My job was actually originally to just focus on Black History or African American History Month. I guess I could get up here and do what some of our media networks say, and we're commemorating African American history, and they never tell us how or what or whatever. But one thing that kind of fell in our lap, and I say our, I mean the John Thomases and the Timothy Thomases in 2016, we had decided we were going to go down to Disney World, and that generally involves a fairly long drive down and a fairly long drive back, which we decided to go on and do, and that often requires an overnight. And so on the way back, I was looking at the map, and suddenly a place that I remember from my young days, early 20s, actually I was in my early 20s, when the name Selma, Alabama became quite familiar to many of us. Have any of you seen that recent movie called Selma? Any people that have seen that yet? It's fairly well done and does document the events leading up to and the events of that occasion that put Selma on the front pages. And by that time, of course, we had TV crews that were out covering things that previously happened in our society, but were never really documented to the way that in the 1960s that became part of it. This year, Selma, Alabama, which claims to be the most significant celebrator of African American events in the United States, is doing their 54th bridge crossing jubilee. The original Bloody Sunday, which was the first attempt to try to cross the bridge, anybody remember the name of the bridge in Selma? That's kind of a insignificant question, but it is the Edmund Pettus Bridge, in which civil rights marchers were quite unceremoniously, quite violently actually, attacked and pushed back across the bridge, many of them having to be carried after being wounded and tear gassed and all the other details that went along with that. I had never really thought until I was thinking of this presentation or information, who was that Edmund Pettus? As you might expect, Edmund Pettus was a lieutenant general in the Confederate Army during the Civil War, and went on to become I believe the title is correct, the Grand Dragon of the Alabama Ku Klux Klan. So, you know, that kind of sets the stage in a way, because when they got around in the Selma, Dallas County area of Alabama to building a bridge across the Alabama River, and by the way, I never really, as far as I knew, I had never really consciously seen the Alabama River until this last summer, but it's really quite a beautiful sight. And the bridge is quite magnificent. It's, you know, not just a small span. It's not like the stand span or any of the Poplar Street Bridge or anything in St. Louis, but it's a worthy bridge. But that's who the name is associated with, right there in east central Alabama. Well, back in 1965, when Selma became in the limelight, one of the big situations related to the issue of voting rights. Voting rights were historically in our country left up to the states. Even though voting is a national right, and we have national elections in our country, we also have state elections and states' rights. But basically, the assumption had become that the states took care of the rules related to voting. At the end of the Civil War, of course, to sort of correct some of the problems that had occurred under slavery, we had the 13th Amendment, which freed the slaves. We had the 14th Amendment, which gave them citizenship. And then we had the 15th Amendment, which sort of indicated that all the rights that were relevant to being the citizen of your country were also for everyone. Not just white men, but they were for everyone. By the time the 20th century dawned, Alabama had reestablished, like most of the South, very strong control in the hands of the white citizens. And when they redid the Alabama Constitution in, I think it was like 1905, about that period, they put in things that were generally called Jim Crow laws. And one of them was that to vote you had to pay a poll tax. So if you were poor, of course, the money that was collected you did not have, and that helped you limit the number of people that were poor from voting. You also had to pass literacy tests. And those were actually included within the Constitution of Alabama in the early 20th century. Well, besides the function of the Ku Klux Klan, which was quite active in Alabama and most of the South in the early part of the 20th century, and those Jim Crow laws, in Dallas County, which is where Selma is located, 1% of the black population, or African American population, actually were registered to vote. So keeping the citizens, the African American citizens, from voting had become quite effective at that time. Well, in the mid-1960s, as people, I guess, began to look around, we're talking about 100 years after the end of the Civil War, and people began to see that really things were not much better than they had been 100 years before, 50 years before, whatever. And one of the big focuses was, if we can vote, perhaps we can help to change the situation. So the focus became on voting rights. And that famous Selma to Montgomery March was to take signed petitions by basically the African American citizens of Dallas County to the state capitol at Montgomery, which of course is where the rules and regulations were made and enforced as to who could vote and who couldn't vote. And it was a petition, another right that we have as citizens, to petition our government. And that's what they were trying to do. The first attempt to cross the bridge was on March the 14th, 1965, and it was the day that is referred to as Bloody Sunday. A week later, the second attempt on the 21st was supervised by state militia and federal armed troops who accompanied the marchers across the bridge and then the 30 miles to Montgomery. It took them, well, they actually took an extra day. They spent 3 nights on the road, and then on the 4th day, about 25,000 citizens, primarily black or African American, but also with white participation also, entered Montgomery and were able to deliver the petition requesting that their rights to vote were accomplished. Well, as you might imagine, it fell upon deaf ears, except in the national government, and later in 1965, the Voting Rights Act was passed by the United States Congress and signed by President Johnson. It was mixed, as it is today, whether we needed that. A lot of people thought that that was an overreach by the national government because everybody knew that it was a state right to set the rules for voting, but they did it anyway, and a lot of the states that had been Democratic flip-flopped to become Republican, and in many ways it stays that way today. This next weekend is this year's Jubilee in Selma. They will have 5 days of celebration and education, recollection, worship services. There's a band where you have bands competing against each other with popular music. All kinds of things will be going on in Selma. There will be a reenactment of the march, again, across the bridge. It's something that they do on an annual basis. I think as citizens we need to remember that these are just simply talking about voting rights, or they are talking about an essential right, which is voting. And we need to probably in our own prayer time pray for peace and something that Joan's going to read to us about doing to others as we want others to do to us. And that this will be an issue which will become one that we don't in the future even consider, because all citizens will be treated with justice and equity. Thank you for listening.
Please stand for the call to worship. Trust in God and do good, so you will dwell in the land and enjoy security. We shall be still before God and wait patiently, refraining from anger and forsaking wrath. Let us worship God. And please stand, turn to your neighbors, cross your hands over your hearts, outside of the singing a piece of prayer. for him to hear God's voice and receive God's guidance for faithful living. Join with me in our prayer of confession. Compassionate caring, understanding brother, loving and forgiving spirit, you know how weak we are and how prone to retaliate when treated despitefully. We would rather return the curse with curse and a blow with a blow. We refuse many who ask us for what we think we do not know. We are ready to sue the return of what is rightfully ours. How is it that you expect us to do good to those who hate us? Is it really possible that we become so much like Jesus Christ? Forgive us for his sake, for we are not. Amen. And for the assurance of forgiveness, friends, hear the good news, as we have worn the likeness of the human in the earth. We shall wear the likeness of the heavenly Son, the last Adam, Jesus Christ. Friends, believe the good news. In Jesus Christ, we are forgiven. And for the scripture reading, Genesis chapter 45, verses 3 through 11 and 15. Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still living? But his brothers were not able to answer him, because they were terrified at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, Come close to me. When they had done so, he said, I am your brother, Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed, and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will not be plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then it was not you who sent me there, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler of all Egypt. Now hurry back to my father and say to him, This is what your son Joseph says. God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, don't delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me, you, your children and grandchildren, your flocks and herds, and all you have. I will provide for you there, because 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise, you and your household and all who belong to you will become destitute. And he kissed all his brothers and wept over them. Afterward, his brothers talked with him. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Another scripture reading from Psalms chapter 37, verses 1 through 11. Do not fret because of evil men, or be envious of those who do wrong. For like the grass they will soon wither, like green plants they will soon die away. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and enjoy safe pasture. Delight yourself in the Lord. Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord, trust in him, and he will do this. He will make your righteousness shine like the dawn, the justice of your cause like the noonday sun. Be still before the Lord, and wait patiently for him. Do not fret when men succeed in their ways, when they carry out their wicked schemes. Refrain from anger and turn from wrath. Do not fret, it leads only to evil. For evil men will be cut off, but those who hope in the Lord will inherit the land. A little while, and the wicked will be no more. Though you look for them, they will not be found. But the meek will inherit the land and enjoy great peace. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
For this moment of speaking to the children of God, maybe I need to speak into the mic. One of the things, when I was doing primarily church education in the church, was a song I learned that was written by Mary Lou Walker, who became alarmed when she heard the kind of interactions that was going on in playgrounds and preschools where her children were engaged. And she was a musician, so she started to write some songs for her children to teach them the values that she wanted them to have, that she hoped she could hear on the playgrounds. And one of the songs she wrote was Pebbles, and maybe you have heard this in other contexts. But she talked about how the pebbles enter the water and form a circle. And the song went kind of like this: circles on water from one little stone, the circles were wider when you leave them alone. Touch them aside, cast them astray, those circles on water, they touch you and me. And she was wanting her children to see how their behaviors made circles to all their friends and their family. And that the one little pebble, one little thing could affect the way they treated one another and knew each other. And so that song kept running through my mind this week as I reflected on these scriptures. And so I commend it to you, and I may share it in the newsletter or something with all the right words, because it has been a song in my heart for a long time.
I
hearts and our minds, O God, to the word that is presented this day. May we hear it in a new and fresh way. May it energize us for life as disciples of Jesus Christ. We pray in his name. Amen. The New Testament scripture this day is one you probably could all recite. But listen anyway to the word of God as it's found in Luke 6, 27 through 36. Jesus is still teaching his disciples. And this is what he says. But I tell you who hear me, love your enemies. Do not, excuse me, I have to get this up like this right. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. If someone strikes you on one cheek, turn to him the other. Also, if someone takes your cloak, do not stop him from taking your tunic. Give to everyone who asks, and if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. And if you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners, expecting to be repaid in full. But love your enemies. Do good to them and lend them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High, because he is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Be merciful just as your Father is merciful. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks God. Joseph could have been very angry with his brothers. They had done more than amuse him. They really had hoped that he would not survive when they sold him to the Egyptians. Now they did not recognize him, and they certainly didn't expect Joseph to be the one in charge